Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
I'm doing fine. Good. Let's talk about foreign policy. It's been almost a day now since we've been talking about foreign policy. But we consider foreign policy to be pretty important. Of course, the ultimate test is the size of our government and the money they spend. But foreign policy is involved in spending a lot of money, and from our viewpoint, not very much in a positive manner. But the money is being spent, trillions of dollars, hard to manage. Don't audit the Pentagon, just let it go on. But I wanted to go over, a general review of what we're doing. And yesterday, we tried to get excited, and we were positive because word got out that Trump had indicated that the stupidest thing they ever heard of in foreign policy was our invasion of Iraq. So this is good, and we were only lamenting the fact that we'd like to apply that policy to everybody around there. And then now the question is raised, and this was said in a secret meeting, a fundraiser, so it wasn't a public announcement, but the information got out, but he just, and he said this before in the campaign, that it was a stupid move on Bush's part to start the war against Iraq. But yesterday, we were pleased that he was, being critical of it. But today we get a report that NATO makes a statement on Iraq. And NATO said, we think we should be staying in Iraq. So what really does this mean? Does Iraq speak for us? I mean, does NATO speak for us? Do we control NATO? Where the money comes? Where are the troops? Does that have any meaning, or is it just participating to keep everybody off balance so nobody knows what they're doing?
Yeah, this is something else that we got, antiwar.com. We got a lot of articles. Right. We wanted to do kind of a survey of areas where there's chaos. And so Jens Stoltenberg, who's the Secretary General of NATO, said, no, we're not going anywhere. We got a note from Abadi, the Prime Minister of Iraq. He's asked us to say, well, as we discussed recently, the Iraqi Parliament, actually I think you discussed it in your column, the Iraqi Parliament voted that the U.S. should set a timetable for leaving. So who's who and what's what? The question of President Trump said, we pay the bills for places like NATO. We're going to have to call the shots. Well, who's calling the shots here?
Yeah, the whole thing is when you look at all these areas where you are, and our conclusion really, or our suggestion in the title is, it's chaotic. Is it just because they do dumb things, like Trump indicated, dumb things in Iraq? Is it done on purpose, and who benefits from the chaos? It's hard to believe that it's just bad judgment. I used to like to say, it's just bad judgment. They're making a mistake, and give them an out. And others say, no, everything is deliberate. And there's probably some truth in between there someplace. It's probably stupidity and an ulterior motive, because obviously the neocons have ulterior motives for being involved and orchestrating all this. At the same time, the people continue to suffer in this chaos. So it's sort of a theme that I think is important, because there is an announced intent. If you look at what cultural Marxism is all about, they like chaos. Well, maybe some people believe, maybe neocons believe this, chaos in the Middle East might be an asset for rebuilding and remodeling the Middle East, just like World War I did it. Now it's time to have chaos and time to rebuild the Middle East. So it may well be purposeful chaos, and of course that to me would be much more evil than stupidity. Stupidity is bad, but when they have these ulterior motives that they're willing to start wars in order to rebuild a whole organization, and that brings up the subject, do you think that's what we're doing in Africa? We're just practically covering Africa with us being involved in so many countries there, and the American people aren't even aware of it.
Yeah, take a President Trump, take a candidate Trump who was skeptical on the campaign trail about this overreach, about nation building, about all these things. So why do we have troops in 54 out of 58 African countries is a question. Why has he not said a thing about it? Why has he not explained why we're there?
You know, in another area we were very complimentary of was what was happening at the Olympic Games. You know, the Winter Games in South Korea. We kept our fingers crossed, hoped the North Koreans would speak with the South Koreans. It looked like they are, and looks like they followed through. And the South Koreans have sent some dignitaries up to North Korea, and that seems to be making progress. But it doesn't look like our president is doing much to encourage that to happen.
No, he's not, and demanding that there be agreements before talks can even begin. Also trying to start up the military exercises between the U.S. and South Korea, because that really is a sticking point, and I think that triggers the North Koreans to launch another test, and round it goes. But there was apparently very successful talks in North Korea between the South Korean delegation and North Korean representatives, and they're laying the groundwork for a direct meeting between President Moon of South Korea and Kim Jong-un in North Korea. So that will be a real breakthrough.
You know, and I see a contradiction in the policy, because Trump has been emphatic. You never tell the enemy what you're going to do, and don't even tell the American people what they plan to do or what country they're going to invade. At the same time, he's not bashful in talking about what he's going to do and what he's going to threaten them with, and he's throwing those threats out there constantly. So it's a mixed bag. If he's not telling the enemy what he's going to do, maybe he's fibbing with all these threats. And this comes up with another element of foreign policy, which is a mixture with economic policy, and that's trade policy on the tariffs. That's been big in the news, the consequence of tariffs being put on, and we did a program on that, and we of course came down strongly against the tariffs. But that mixes in because it does affect relationships with other countries, and it also makes one think about why do they use sanctions? You know, are sanctions there to really improve our benefits or to stir up trouble? So the economics of tariffs and sanctions is very much of a contributory factor to the chaos internationally. I don't think it helps anybody, to tell you the truth.
And they are so interconnected. You think about, Trump said a few days ago, hey, I may put some tariffs on European cars, you know, and the Europeans had a panic attack. At the same time, Trump is desperately trying to get, especially the French and Germans, to get behind him in trying to abrogate the Iran the Iran nuclear treaty. So if he's, on one hand, he's trying to get them on board with this, and then he slaps them in the face with tariffs, talk about chaos.
Yeah, and Trump throws back the threats. Somebody said, we're going to raise taxes on you. I'll tax you $1 trillion. And it just goes back and forth. But and the people really don't know what to think and what is going to happen. But it does rock the markets. You know, it's up and down. And of course, there's so much distortion and debt in the market. It's going to not take a whole lot to bring them crashing down. He's also not given up on Syria, Trump. That is,
yeah.
He's more threats against him. I think they're talking about using bombs. Of course, we bombed last year. You know, a lot of missiles we shot, and now he's shifting the emphasis. I don't think he's not as interested in ISIS. Not even pretend. Remember, he used to pretend we're there for ISIS. Of course, we were helping ISIS because ISIS was going to help us get rid of Assad. You know, the insanity of the whole thing. But he's talking now about more military threats in Syria.
Well, two very bizarre things have happened in the past day or so with regard to Syria. The first is, as you had alluded to, the strategic pause, they call it. And it's actually, it's not funny, but it is sort of laughable, because the U.S. has this army of Kurds that it's using in eastern Syria. It says it's using to fight ISIS. But what happened is Turkey, invaded Syria in the north, from the northwest, and so all the Kurds, the American proxies, went to fight Turkey, an American ally in NATO. So there goes our army. And the other thing, as you mentioned, is that Trump apparently told his military, hey, I need another plan to attack Syria. They're using all this gas everywhere. And that was the same excuse he used last April, was never proven. We've never seen any evidence. The idea that he's going to use a little chlorine gas, which is totally useless in warfare against his own people, is pretty absurd. There's no evidence, yet he still says he wants to draw up plans for an attack.
You know, we've been hoping that Trump would be more consistent on his critique of us going into Iraq. But one place where, unfortunately, he's been very consistent on is the policy with Iran. He wants to antagonize. He wants to undo that agreement. And most people worldwide see that that was a slight step in the right directions of keeping Iran from working on this nuclear weapon and having inspections. So that was considered a positive. The interesting thing that came out in this news, and I probably saw this on anti-war, is the Iranians are flying American-made tornado.
Tomcats, yeah, the F-14s.
Yeah, and they have 40 of them. And these are planes that we were involved in back in the 70s when we were close allies with Saddam Hussein, and we instituted a war against Iran, and then these weapons end up, as a matter of fact, we ended up selling Iran these weapons, to balance things. So it's a true statement. It's not overstated when we say, why are we giving these weapons? Why are we spending these weapons? They're going to be used against it. So if they fall through and aggravate and get something stirred up and have a hot war, it'll be American weapons fighting American weapons, and of course, contribute to the chaos.
Well, here's one place where American weapons may well be fighting Russian weapons, and that's in Ukraine. We talked about before the show, the Trump administration has gone beyond even what Obama did in terms of military. Of course, Obama was responsible for the coup against the government there, but the Trump administration announced that it's going to be selling, I think, about 200 Javelin missiles to Kiev, to the Ukrainian government. And those may well end up being. This is a war we don't talk about as much now. It's sort of going on quietly. They're shelling back and forth. But with these javelins, and with the wink of support that it provides Kiev, they may be emboldened. They may have experienced moral hazard and be emboldened to start provoking Russia more.
The military-industrial complex obviously are a very, very powerful lobbying group, and they make a lot of money. And we produce the weapons, the taxpayers pays for the R&D, they develop these weapons, then the businessman gets to sell these weapons, usually at subsidized loans that we give export-import money in, and they get the subsidized loans. And yet the one agreement is when we sell these weapons, the company gets their money, but the agreement is the country that got the weapons will start paying the United States government funds for R&D, because we developed them, the taxpayer developed them. And there was just a report out now that said, well, over the past 4, 5, 6 years, I don't know what years they were, but they wrote off $16 billion and say, oh, you don't have to pay us at all. So we paid for the R&D, we subsidized the sales, and then we come along and the agreement to pay for the R&D, they don't do it. So I would say, it's time we get out of the weapons manufacturing business and selling weapons. And we are the champion there. We are number one. We might not be number one in steel, but we sure are number one in selling weapons overseas. And the military-industrial complex, number one in making huge profits.
And that's foreign aid, but it's foreign aid to a negative purpose. It actually harms us to have these weapons. But we talk about fixing some potholes, building some bridges here in the U.S. $16 billion would be a pretty good start, I think.
Yeah, that's for sure. There's another trip that Trump's going to make in May. He's going over to the Middle East, and he's been working very hard, and he has a peace plan. They're always working on peace. Every president has to have a job on peace. But Trump has made the announcement already, a month or so ago, that he does support putting our embassy in Jerusalem. Sounds pretty benign, they say that, except for the fact that Jerusalem is still in dispute on who really should be in charge of Jerusalem. And when the UN spoke, it was supposed to be an international city, and Christians, Jews, and Muslims would share it. But the fact that we're going to put our embassy there, and I think he's going to celebrate this, is probably stirring up a hornet's nest. And even those, there are Israelis that disagree with it, the Arabs all disagree with it, and the Christians have spurned it. They wouldn't even accept a visit by Pence, and he's supposed to be part of the Christian community, because it's so much of a hotbed issue. So once again, it'll be chaotic and it'll be disruptive, and then it also gets involved in a lot of demagoguing too on, oh, well, if you're not for this, and if you criticize it, you're a bad guy.
Well, Trump's foreign policy, Trump's entire foreign and domestic policy was America first. I don't see how moving an embassy from one area to a very disputed area where you're going to irritate literally the entire rest of the world, I don't see how that serves American interests in any way, shape, or form.
If we're talking about chaos and the chaos benefiting one group over another, you really can't separate this from cultural Marxism. Cultural Marxism seems to deal with trying to stir the real dissent on our college campuses and the ridiculous, social mores that they're trying to change, and it just looks terrible. But then when you have this type of chaos, which is international and military and trade and economics, all of a sudden they seem to maybe be meshing. So could it be that there are some people who will enjoy both? Certainly when the Cold War was going on, they didn't talk about cultural Marxism, they talked about economic Marxism. And that more or less was considered a failure, when the Soviet system collapsed. It doesn't work. But once again, though, we have this neocon type of foreign policy that may well have the same theory that the communists had. Not so much that they would be communists, but they're one-worlders. And when you have social chaos, stir up the animosity among races and wealth classes and just demagogue the issue, that then you wonder why we don't have a lot more problems in our country today, because there's certainly a lot of people aggravating. And can you imagine this, that people would actually spend money purposely doing this? And we've heard about people in cultural Marxism that some of these demonstrations, even on these gun demonstrations now, all of a sudden you see some young people out there that are holding up signs, and they're just following the line of these cultural Marxists that have a lot of money.
Well, we're expected to believe that it's the Russians that are sowing discontent in our culture. Well, Dr. Paul, I want to end on a positive note, because
Good.
I'm always about the good news. I have read recently that, and it hasn't been confirmed, but that the administration is seriously considering not only getting rid of democracy promotion, which leads to nothing but death and destruction, but also thinking about even defunding the National Endowment for Democracy, which is a hotbed of neocons. It's been headed by, believe it or not, a Trotskyite since the day it was founded in 1983. The guy's still clinging to power there. Defunding that would be one good move, and if you do that, Mr. President, we're going to have a show and we're going to praise you for doing it.
No, and I think it's good to try to look for the positive, and this might be a backhanded type of a positive. But, corrections, whether it's in foreign policy or economic policies, are good. That's what they're for. They're to correct the mistakes. And I think a lot of the corrections are coming. And I think the seeds have been sown in this country with a lot of young people and a lot of people interested in the cause of liberty. And they know what economic system that we ought to have, and they know that we ought to be less involved overseas. But it is coming to an end. It's going to end because we won't be able to afford it. So people say, oh, this will be terrible, terrible. It's going to hurt the dollar and all these kind of things. Well, spending is the problem. Debt is the problem. And we have a bunch of people in Washington and a bunch of people with their hands out around the country, not only in the military-industrial complex, but in the welfare state, and they think it's going to be endless. What has to end, and the Soviet system ended in a way gracefully compared to what it could have been when we were considering a much different ending in the 1960s during the hot Cold War, that it ended with more grace than I ever dreamed. And that would happen. If it goes bankrupt, it's fine and dandy. It's not so bad. The only thing that really counts is that the American people ask a serious question: what should the role of government be? And if they come to the conclusion, which I and others have, the role of government ought to be very limited. That is what the founders described. It ought to be limited to the protection of liberty, which means that we would have free markets, sound money, personal civil liberties. We would have a non-interventionist foreign policy. Not very complex, but believe me, it would be a bold move toward peace and prosperity. And that is the reason that we should remain optimistic. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.